I want to tell you something before I start. I've told this story maybe 40 times since it happened, to military debrief officers, to journalists who showed up with recording devices I didn't recognize, to my sister, who cried through the whole thing and then made me repeat it again because she said she needed to hear how it ended. I've told it to people who believed me and people who absolutely did not. I've told it to a therapist named Dr. Osai, who sat very still and nodded very slowly, and never once told me I was crazy, which I appreciated more than I can say. Every single time I tell it, someone leans forward at a certain point. Always the same moment. Always when I get to the part where the sky opened up. So I'm going to tell it again, from the beginning. The real beginning, not the clean version I gave to the military review board where I left out the part where Corporal Yusef cried, or the part where Lieutenant Dara said something so quietly human that I almost couldn't breathe when I heard it. I'm going to tell you the whole thing. Because you need to understand what it was like before they arrived, to understand why their arrival broke something open in all of us. Something that had been sealed shut for a very long time. My name is Specialist René Solano. I was 26 years old when this happened. I was assigned to Forward Observation Post Threshold 7, which sounds more impressive than it was. It was basically a reinforced ledge of rock and polymer composite on the edge of a collapsed ridge on a planet called Vasher IV, and my job was to watch the valley below and report what I saw. Vasher IV is not a beautiful planet. I want to say that clearly because some of the post-incident news coverage kept using that word, beautiful, when they showed aerial footage. They would play soft music and show the violet cloud formations and the way the bioluminescent rivers looked from orbit, and I understand why. It looks extraordinary from up there. From the ground it is terrifying. The atmosphere has too much nitrogen in the lower altitudes, which means you breathe through a partial rebreather mask below 300 meters. The gravity is 1.3 standard, which doesn't sound like much until you've been carrying 40 kilograms of equipment in it for 6 hours, and your knees start to feel like they're filled with wet sand. The flora is aggressive. Not predatory in any way the Galactic Compact recognizes. They don't eat you. They don't chase you. But the root systems crack through anything, and the pollen from the red-cap fungi causes visual hallucinations in humans that last between 4 and 11 hours, and are, according to most people who have experienced them, deeply unpleasant. I knew all of this before I arrived. I did not know that the planet would also be the place where I watched my commanding officer try to talk an alien fleet out of glassing a valley containing 312 people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started with a sound. Everything on Vasher IV starts with sound. The planet is never silent. There's always something. Wind through the hollow reed columns that grow along the ridgeline. The low subsonic hum of the bioluminescent channels that run beneath the topsoil. The distant percussion of the fauna in the lowlands. Things with too many legs that move in herds you can hear from 2 kilometers away. You learn to filter it all out. You have to, or you go a little crazy. Which is why, when the new sound started, every single person in Threshold 7 heard it immediately. It was not a sound I could describe accurately in real time. Later, I would learn it was the harmonic resonance of a Krethvashari displacement field, a specific type of faster-than-light approach signature that the compact sensor arrays are calibrated to detect at 700,000 kilometers. Our post's equipment detected it at roughly 140,000, which gave us about 11 minutes. I remember looking at the sensor screen. I remember the number. 312. That was how many people were in the valley and on the surrounding posts combined. Scientists from the Compact's Xenobiological Survey Division. 2 platoons of standard Compact security forces, Velthari species, armored, decent fighters but optimized for perimeter control, not combat. A handful of human advisors, because humans were always the advisors. A few others I won't categorize because I'm not sure the compact has cleared the classification on their presence yet. 312 people. 11 minutes. Let me back up 3 days, because you can't understand the 11 minutes without understanding the 3 days. I had been on Vasher IV for 9 weeks when this happened. 9 weeks as part of what the compact called a joint survey and security operation, which is diplomatic language for we found something valuable on this planet, and we sent people to figure out what it is while other people with weapons stand nearby. The compact, the Galactic Compact, for those of you who haven't been following the last 40 years of political restructuring, is a governing body of 23 species, and humanity is the newest member. We joined 11 years ago. We are the youngest member by about 3,000 years, which you'd think would make us the least important, and in a lot of ways it does. We don't have a permanent seat on the High Assembly. Our technology is primitive by most compact standards. Our military capacity is, according to most assessments, adequate for local system defense. That phrase, adequate for local system defense. I heard it so many times during my integration training that I started saying it in my sleep. Lieutenant Dara told me I was muttering it during a rest cycle once, and she found it concerning. Lieutenant Dara, I'll get to her, she's important. The point is, 9 weeks into the survey operation, we had established a solid working relationship with the Velthari security forces. We had a comfortable, if cramped, post set up on the ridgeline, and the scientists in the valley were making what I was told were extraordinary discoveries about the subsurface crystal formations that gave Vasher IV its bioluminescent river systems. I didn't fully understand the science. What I understood was that the crystals were apparently rare enough that 3 separate non-compact species had been making increasingly aggressive inquiries through compact diplomatic channels about access to Vasher IV's survey data. The Krethvashari were one of those species. The Krethvashari are not easy to describe in terms a human brain processes comfortably. They are large, not in the way that makes you think of animals, not bulk, exactly, but in the way that makes the space around them feel smaller. The average adult Krethvashari stands at roughly 3.5 meters, with a bilateral symmetry that's almost familiar until you notice the secondary joint structure in their limbs, and the fact that their sensory organs are positioned in a way that means they have nearly complete spherical awareness. No blind spots, at all. They are also, by every metric the compact uses to assess such things, a significantly more advanced civilization than humanity. Their ships use displacement drives that make our fastest vessels look like they're moving through syrup. Their weapons technology is classified at a level I don't have clearance for, but I know what it does to terrain when deployed. I've seen the geological surveys from Pellar Station, where a Krethvashari dispute with the Veltharis 6 years ago was resolved in 4 hours and left a crater 200 meters deep. 4 hours. 200 meters deep. And they were annoyed with the Veltharis. They were not actively at war with them. I thought about Pellar Station a lot during those 11 minutes. 3 days before the 11 minutes, we received an encrypted communication through the compact relay that our Velthari commander, Sub-Marshal Threnos, spent 40 minutes decoding with his senior communications officer. When he came out of the communications room, he walked past all of us without speaking and stood at the observation window for a long time. Sub-Marshal Threnos was not an expressive individual. Veltharis generally aren't. Their communication is heavily reliant on subtle chromatic shifts in their secondary skin layer, and most humans at Threshold 7 had gotten decent at reading basic signals, but the nuance was always beyond us. What I could read was posture, and the sub-marshal's posture when he came out of that room was the posture of someone who had received news they had been hoping very hard to avoid receiving. I was refilling my water processor when Lieutenant Dara appeared beside me. "They're coming," she said. She said it very quietly, not like she was being dramatic, like she was just saying a factual thing and trying to make herself believe it was just a factual thing. "Who?" "The Krethvashari." She paused. "3 vessels. Compact has confirmed it. They're claiming survey rights under the primacy clause." The primacy clause. I knew what that was. Everyone in the compact did. It was the legal mechanism by which a species could claim resource access to an unclaimed or contested world if they could demonstrate prior survey or cultural connection. The Krethvashari had apparently filed a primacy claim on Vasher IV 17 months ago that the compact had been processing through legal channels. "What does that mean for us?" I asked. Lieutenant Dara looked at me with that expression she had, the one where she was deciding how much honesty you could handle. "It means," she said carefully, "that if their claim is upheld, we leave, evacuate, pack up the survey data and go. And if their claim isn't upheld." She was quiet for a moment. "We were told to continue operations," she said, "until we receive formal notification of claim approval." I understood what she wasn't saying. We were the notification. We were there so that the compact had a physical presence on the planet when the Krethvashari arrived. A symbol, a statement. We are here. Our people are here. Our equipment is here. If you want this planet, you have to deal with this first. 312 people. A symbol. I finished filling my water processor and didn't say anything else. Chapter 3. Build. 3 days of wait. Submarshal Threnos held a full briefing the following morning. He was composed, I'll give him that. He laid out the situation with the precision that Veltharis are known for, every fact in order, every variable quantified where possible, every uncertainty acknowledged. The Krethvashari vessels would arrive in approximately 72 hours. Their stated intention was to conduct a survey assessment in accordance with primacy clause provisions. Compact diplomatic teams were engaged. Our orders were to maintain position, maintain professional conduct, and avoid any action that could be construed as hostile. He listed the weapons systems the Krethvashari vessels were likely carrying. He listed them methodically, without emphasis. I sat in the briefing and watched people's faces as he read the list. Corporal Yusef, who was 22 and from Casablanca, and who had a photograph of his mother tucked inside the band of his rebreather mask, went very still. The Velthari security personnel showed the faint iridescent flicker at their secondary skin layer that I'd learned to associate with anxiety. One of the compact xenobiologists, a woman named Dr. Pellerin, brilliant, constantly irritated, the kind of person who made you feel slow just being near her, wrote something in her notebook and then looked at what she'd written and crossed it out. Lieutenant Dara watched the submarshal the whole time. She didn't write anything. She didn't move. She was doing that thing she did where she was thinking very hard and very fast, and you could almost see it happening behind her eyes. After the briefing, we dispersed. People found small tasks to do, maintenance that didn't need doing, inventory that had been counted the day before. This is a thing that happens when there is nothing productive to do, and the thing you cannot do anything about is extremely large and approaching at measurable speed. You find small things, manageable things, things you can complete. I spent 2 hours reorganizing the sensor array calibration logs. They didn't need reorganizing. The second day was worse than the first. On the first day, 72 hours felt like a buffer. On the second day, 48 hours felt like a countdown. 3 things happened on the second day that I remember clearly. The first, Submarshal Threnos received another communication from Compact Command. This one he shared without going to the window first. He came straight out of the comm room and gathered the senior staff. I wasn't senior staff, but I was standing near enough that I heard through the doorway, and Lieutenant Dara told me the rest afterward. Compact diplomatic teams had made contact with the Krethvashari vessels. Initial response from the Krethvashari delegation was described in the communication as non-encouraging. The specific phrase used was that the Krethvashari delegation had acknowledged receipt of compact diplomatic communication and declined to confirm intent to observe standard survey protocols. Declined to confirm intent to observe standard survey protocols. That is a very carefully constructed sentence for a very specific purpose, which is to convey something alarming while maintaining enough bureaucratic insulation that no one has to say the alarming thing out loud. The alarming thing was this. The Krethvashari had essentially told the compact diplomatic team that they were coming, and they were not making any promises about what they would or wouldn't do when they got there. The second thing, Corporal Yusuf asked Lieutenant Dara quietly whether they were going to die. I was close enough to hear this too. I don't think he knew I was there. He asked it very simply, the way a person asks when they have stopped being embarrassed about being afraid. Lieutenant Dara looked at him for a moment. "I don't know," she said. "I genuinely don't know." He nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He went back to his post. I have thought about that exchange many times. The honesty of it. Most leaders would have said something reassuring. Something about the compact's diplomatic capacity or our defensive systems, or the fact that direct military action against a joint survey team would be a significant political cost for the Krethvashari. She said she didn't know. And somehow that was what he needed. The third thing. Lieutenant Dara sat down next to me at the observation ledge as I was running my evening sensor sweep and said, "I sent a personal communication out on the compact relay this morning." I looked at her. "To my brother," she said. "He's stationed at Meridian Station." I told him where I was and that I was. She paused. I told him that I was okay and that I was thinking about when we were kids. She didn't look at me when she said this. I didn't look at her. "I sent one to my sister," I said. 2 days ago, actually, before the briefing." "Yeah," she said. We sat there for a while. The bioluminescent channels below were cycling through their evening spectrum, blues and greens with occasional pulses of deep violet where the crystal density was highest. It was, objectively, stunning to look at. I remember thinking, with a kind of detached clarity, that it was strange to be sitting on the edge of something terrible and watching something beautiful, and that this was probably a very human thing to find strange, since the universe clearly had no opinion about the contrast. "Get some sleep," Lieutenant Dara said eventually. "You too." Neither of us moved for another hour. The third day arrived, and the sky on Vasher IV did what it always did in the local morning hours. It went through a progression of amber to red to a deep, bruised orange before settling into the pale lavender that passed for daylight at this latitude. I watched it from my post. The sensors were clean, which meant nothing because Krethvashari vessels were not reliably detectable until they chose to be. Submarshal Threnos had deployed all available sensor arrays and established rotating visual watches on every clear sightline. The Velthari security forces were in full kit, weapons at ready carry. 2 of the compact xenobiologists had been moved from the valley floor to the higher research shelter, which had slightly better passive shielding. Dr. Pellerin had refused to move. She said, and I am quoting directly here because I wrote it down afterward, "If something is going to destroy this survey site, I intend to be the last person standing in front of the samples." Nobody argued with her. Lieutenant Dara had spent the morning on the comm system running through what she called contingency communications, which was a way of saying she was identifying every possible channel we could reach and every possible relay point, so that if the primary channels went down, we'd know exactly what to try next. It was good thinking, practical, the kind of thing that keeps your hands busy and your mind somewhere useful. I helped her run the relay tests until 1100 local time. At 11:47, the sensors picked up the harmonic. 11 minutes. The alarm was not loud. It was a tone, 3 ascending notes repeated that every person in Threshold 7 knew. We drilled on it. We all knew what it meant. The response was fast, disciplined. People moved to their positions with the kind of efficiency that training produces even when the brain is doing something else entirely, which mine was. Submarshal Threnos was at the command station within 30 seconds. Lieutenant Dara was beside him. The Velthari security forces were arrayed across the ridgeline in defensive formation. Corporal Yusef was at the forward sensor array with 2 other human specialists, including me. 10 minutes. I remember looking at the sky. It was still that pale lavender, completely ordinary, not a single visual indication that anything was different. Just the red-cap fungi on the ridgeline and the hollow reed columns moving in the thermal updrafts and the bioluminescent channels doing what they always did. 9 minutes. Submarshal Threnos opened a channel to Compact Command. Threshold 7 to Command. We are reading displacement harmonic. Confirmed approach signature. 3 vessels consistent with Krethvashari designation. Requesting immediate diplomatic escalation and backup acknowledgement. Please respond. The response came back in 40 seconds. Threshold 7 Command acknowledges. Diplomatic channels active. Escalation in progress. No additional assets available in system at this time. You are instructed to maintain position, avoid hostile action, and preserve communication integrity. Command out. No additional assets available in system. 8 minutes. I watched Threnos receive that message. His secondary skin layer, which was usually a very controlled, steady greenish-gray, pulsed once, deeply. A color I hadn't seen from him before. It was gone in less than a second, and then he was composed again, and he began issuing positioning orders in a calm and methodical voice. I found out later, from the xenobiologist who specialized in Velthari communication, that the color he'd flashed for that 1 second was the equivalent of a person pressing their eyes shut and breathing through their teeth. 7 minutes. Lieutenant Dara appeared beside me at the sensor array. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said, which was not true. "Yeah, me too," she said, which also was clearly not true. 6 minutes. The ships appeared at 5 minutes and 40 seconds. Not gradually, not the way you see ships arrive in simulations, the slow brightening of an approach burn or the distant speck that grows. They were not there, and then they were there. 3 vessels the color of deep ocean water, surface textures that looked almost organic, running lights in configurations that my brain kept trying to interpret as patterns and couldn't. They were very large. I had seen the technical specifications in the briefing files. I had read the dimensions. Reading dimensions and looking at a thing are different experiences. My brain had to try several times to correctly process the scale. The largest vessel, the central one, was roughly 4 kilometers in length. I kept thinking about that number and then looking at the ship and thinking, no, that can't be right. Then thinking, yes, apparently it is. They did not approach at speed. They moved with the deliberate, comfortable slowness of things that have no reason to hurry. 4 minutes. "We are in visual range," Threnos said over the comm, as if anyone needed to be told. "All personnel maintain positions, no weapons deployment, all communication channels open." He opened a hailing frequency. "Krethvashari vessels, this is Submarshal Threnos of the Galactic Compact, commanding survey and security operations on Vasher IV. We acknowledge your approach and your primacy claim filing. We ask that you hold at current distance pending compact diplomatic review. Please respond." 3 minutes. Silence. 2 minutes. The largest vessel moved forward, slowly, steadily. The other two flanked it, maintaining perfect formation. Krethvashari vessels, please respond. We are a survey team. We have civilian personnel. We are not a military installation. We are requesting communication. 1 minute and 30 seconds. Still no response. I remember the sound of Corporal Yusef's breathing changing beside me. I remember the sound of wind through the reed columns. I remember thinking, very clearly, this is happening. This is actually happening. 1 minute. Compact command, this is Threshold 7. Krethvashari vessels are not responding to hails. They are at, Threnos paused, checking the display, at approximately 40,000 kilometers and closing. Please advise. Please advise immediately. The response from command was 12 seconds of silence followed by, Threshold 7, we are working diplomatic channels. Please maintain position. We are working diplomatic channels. 45 seconds. Lieutenant Dara's voice was very steady when she said, over the team frequency, everyone listen to me. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, you did your job. Every one of you. You showed up and you did the work, and whatever comes next, that part is done and it is done right. 30 seconds. 20. I looked up at the sky. The largest Krethvashari vessel was directly above us now, its shadow beginning to reach the ridgeline. The scale of it from directly below was genuinely incomprehensible. It blotted out a section of the pale lavender sky the way a mountain would, except mountains don't move. 10 seconds. I remember the sound stopped. Not the alarm, not the calm traffic. The background sound of Vasher IV, all of it, the wind and the channels and the fauna, all of it stopped simultaneously, as if the planet itself recognized what was happening overhead and chose silence. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. The shadow covered us completely. That's the first thing. Not the light from the vessels, which I'd expected, some kind of dramatic illumination, but the shadow. The warmth of Vasher IV's sun just stopped. In the middle of the day, on a clear morning, the temperature dropped by about 6 degrees in the space of 15 seconds. And I know that because the thermal sensors on the array registered it, and the number was on the display, and I was staring at the display because I didn't know where else to look. 6 degrees. In 15 seconds. The scale of what was blocking the sun, to drop the temperature 6 degrees in 15 seconds on an open ridgeline. I knew the number, 4 kilometers. I kept knowing it and it kept not being real. The comm channels were saturated. Threnos was still attempting to raise the Krethvashari vessels. Compact command was transmitting on all available diplomatic frequencies. The xenobiologists in the valley had been told to move to shelter, and at least 2 of them had refused, which I found out later, and which surprised absolutely nobody. Dr. Pellerin was, by all accounts, standing outside with her scanner pointed upward. The Velthari security forces on the ridgeline had weapons ready but not raised. That was the correct protocol, and Threnos had been very clear about it. Do not raise weapons. Do not give them a reason. Do not provide a pretext. Nobody was speaking on the team frequency. And then the ship spoke. The Krethvashari communication system doesn't work through the same radio frequency protocols that most compact species use. Their transmissions come through something called a resonance broadcast. It modulates directly into the local electromagnetic environment at a frequency that most biological nervous systems can detect as sound. No receiver required. You just hear it. It's not pleasant. It feels like the sound is happening inside your skull rather than outside it, and the translation matrix in your comm system tries to process it and overlay a verbal equivalent. But there's always a fraction of a second of delay between the sensation and the words, and in that fraction of a second your brain does its best to interpret what it's feeling, and usually concludes something like enormous or ancient or unstoppable. The words when they came were, "Compact personnel. This world is subject to primacy claim GKV 4471, filed in accordance with Compact Charter Provisions 17.3 through 17.9. Your survey authorization is superseded. You have a pause, a standard interval to begin evacuation." A standard interval. In Compact Standard Time, that's 4 hours. 4 hours to pack up 312 people, weeks of survey equipment, and the geological samples that the xenobiologists had been collecting for 9 weeks, from a ridgeline on a planet with 1.3 standard gravity, through an atmosphere that required partial rebreathers below 300 meters, to vessels whose capacity. I did the math immediately, because I do that under stress. I run numbers, whose capacity was enough to carry everyone but not everything. And certainly not in 4 hours. Threnos responded. He was precise. He acknowledged receipt of the notification. He cited specific Compact Charter provisions regarding the validity of survey continuations pending primacy claim adjudication. He requested a hearing before the claim was enforced. He did this all in a very measured, professional tone, and I watched him do it and I thought, he knows it's not going to work. He's doing it anyway because it's the right process. The Krethvashari response was 2 words. 4 hours. And then silence. Chapter 7. The next 3 hours and 47 minutes. What followed was the most concentrated sequence of activity I have ever participated in. Submarshal Threnos immediately issued evacuation priority orders. Scientists to pack critical samples and data first, physical data storage, not just digital, because physical data storage survives things that digital storage doesn't. Security personnel to begin breakdown of equipment in order of strategic importance. All non-essential personnel to the main landing pad to begin pre-boarding sequences on the 3 transport vessels docked at Threshold 7. 3 transports. Combined capacity, enough for everyone, assuming minimal personal effects and maximum efficiency. Minimum personal effects, I thought. Nobody said that explicitly. Nobody had to. I started moving. There's something almost clarifying about having a concrete task when the thing you cannot control is enormous and overhead and waiting. You move. You pick things up and carry them. You do the next physical thing that needs doing. Your body knows how to work even when your brain is partially occupied with something else. Lieutenant Dara was managing the human contingent's evacuation logistics, coordinating with the Velthari personnel, cross-referencing headcounts, making sure the xenobiologists who had been most reluctant to leave the valley floor were actually moving. I was on equipment breakdown at the sensor array. Corporal Yusef was beside me again. He was very efficient, focused, hands steady. He'd gone somewhere quiet inside himself, I could tell, somewhere past the fear into a kind of calm that soldiers learn to find not because they're fearless, but because they've accepted the situation and the only useful thing left is to move. We worked without talking for about 20 minutes. Then he said, without looking up, "My mother's going to be so annoyed." I kept working. About what? I told her this posting was boring. He detached a sensor coupling with practiced precision. I told her nothing ever happens on survey postings. I thought about that for a second. Then I started laughing. It came out strange, half laugh, half something else, but it was real, and he glanced over and his mouth pulled sideways into something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. And for about 3 seconds we were 2 people who had said an absurd thing, and knew it was absurd, and that was somehow enough. "Pack it," I said, gesturing at the coupling. "Let's go." 47 minutes into the evacuation, the first complication appeared. One of the transport vessels, a compact registration carrier called the Hellion Pathway, reported a drive system fault. Not catastrophic. The drive was functional, but operating at reduced output, which meant it could lift off but couldn't achieve orbit without a longer ascent window. Longer ascent window meant a longer exposure window. Submarshal Threnos absorbed this information with the same contained precision he'd applied to everything else, and began immediately rerouting the loading plan to prioritize the other two vessels. The math was uncomfortable. I wasn't the only one doing it. Lieutenant Dara came to find me about 10 minutes later. She handed me a water pack, the small kind, sealed, that you could drink through your rebreather mask, and kept her voice very matter-of-fact. "Loading priority has changed," she said. "The Hellion pathway is taking the samples and the equipment. The Corvin and the Strait of Nilos are taking personnel. Boarding order is scientists first, then Velthari security by squad, then our team. Our team last." I took the water pack. "Okay." "It's fine," she said. "It's fine, it's the right call, the timeline is still workable." She said it the way people say things they need to say out loud to make them real. "I know," I said. "2 hours left," she said. I nodded. She squeezed my shoulder once briefly and moved on. Chapter 8: The Second Complication. The second complication was larger. 1 hour and 22 minutes remaining, and the compact command relay went down. Not disrupted, not degraded, down, complete signal loss. The indicator on our communication board went from green to amber to red in about 4 seconds, and then every channel came back with the same response: static carrier wave, nothing meaningful. We looked at each other. "Jamming," someone said. "Possibly," Threnos said. He didn't elaborate, he didn't need to. The implication was clear enough. Either the Krethvashari vessels were actively disrupting our communications with compact command, which would be a significant escalation, a hostile act under compact charter, or something had happened to the relay station, which was a different kind of alarming. Either way, we were on our own. He switched to short-range comm, ship to surface, the kind that didn't need the relay network, and confirmed that all 3 transport vessels were still in contact. Local systems were intact. We hadn't lost our ability to communicate with each other or with our own vessels, just with anyone beyond this system. "We continue," Threnos said. He said it very simply. We continued. The Valley scientists were the hardest part. I wasn't involved directly in that evacuation. I was still on the ridgeline with equipment, but I heard it through the comm, and I heard the recordings afterward. The xenobiologists had invested 9 weeks in those subsurface crystal formations. Dr. Pellerin had 3 different ongoing experiments that couldn't be paused without losing months of results. 2 of her colleagues had established baseline readings that were apparently unique in compact science. Measurements nobody had ever taken on an active bioluminescent mineral system of this type. They were being told to walk away from all of it. They did. I want to say that clearly. They argued. They pushed back. Dr. Pellerin apparently said several things that the security officer escorting her described as extremely creative in terms of vocabulary. But they went, every single one of them. Dr. Pellerin walked out of her survey shelter carrying 1 hard-sealed sample case and her notebook. That was all she took from 9 weeks of work on an alien world. 1 case and a notebook. She was the last scientist to board the Corvin. As she stepped onto the ramp, she apparently stopped and looked back at the valley for a moment. The security officer asked her to keep moving. She kept moving. 43 minutes remaining. The Corvin lifted off with the scientists aboard. That was the good news. The Hellion pathway, still running at reduced output, was loaded and preparing to lift. Longer ascent, but the captain had run the calculations and said it was manageable inside the remaining window. The Strait of Nilos was loaded, with the first wave of Velthari security personnel and ready. Remaining on the surface, Submarshal Threnos, Lieutenant Dara, Corporal Youssef, myself, and 11 other members of the Human Advisory Team, plus 4 Velthari squad commanders who were staying with the submarshal. 15 minutes to scheduled boarding, 43 minutes in the window. Manageable. And then the Krethvashari ship moved. Not dramatically, not like an attack. It just shifted its position. The largest vessel descended from its holding position by what the sensors estimated at about 30 kilometers and moved to a position that placed it directly over the main landing pad. Directly over. It didn't do anything, it just hovered. The Strait of Nilos transmitted an urgent message. The displacement field from the Krethvashari vessel was creating enough atmospheric turbulence that they could not safely lift off from the current pad. And the Hellion pathway reported the same. Both vessels loaded ready, unable to lift. Blocked. Not attacked, not threatened explicitly. Just blocked. 29 minutes now. The 4 hours were running out, and there were 2 loaded transports that couldn't move, 15 people on the surface who weren't aboard them, and a 4-kilometer alien ship hovering overhead with its displacement field disrupting the atmosphere below it. This was the moment I stopped running numbers and started doing something I don't often do, which is simply not knowing what was going to happen next. Chapter 9, Threnochius and Dara. Submarshal Threnos opened every channel he had. He hailed the Krethvashari flagship. He cited compact emergency provisions. He described the situation: loaded transports, atmospheric disruption, civilian and scientific personnel aboard, time-critical circumstances. He was not angry. He was not pleading. He was precise and methodical and completely, devastatingly calm. And he made the argument with every tool of diplomacy and charter law that he possessed. The Krethvashari responded once, one sentence. The survey operation must cease. That was it. Not "we understand," not "move your vessels," not any acknowledgement of the people aboard the trapped transports or the diminishing minutes or the fact that we had been complying with their instruction to evacuate. The survey operation must cease. As if the act of leaving were itself a violation of something. I heard Threnos' secondary skin layer make a sound I had never heard before. A very faint sound, almost below audible range, like a structure under load. Lieutenant Dara stepped up beside him. She said very quietly, "Sir. Permission to speak." He looked at her. "I have an idea," she said. "It's probably not a good idea, but I think I want to try it." "What is it?" She told him. He was quiet for a long moment. "That's not a compact sanction protocol," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not in any tactical doctrine I'm aware of." "No, sir. It could make this significantly worse." "It could, yes." Another silence. "Do it," he said. What Lieutenant Dara did was this. She pulled out her personal communication device, not the military-issued hardware, her personal device, and she opened a channel on a very specific frequency. Not the compact relay, which was down, not the military channels. A frequency that she had memorized 11 years ago during the initial years of humanity's integration into the compact, when the human military advisory teams were working out how to talk to people who didn't use the same communication infrastructure. A frequency that only one specific type of vessel monitored. Human vessels. Not compact-registered human vessels operating under compact protocols. Human vessels operating under Earth Defense Authority jurisdiction, which was, technically, legally, diplomatically, a different category than compact military forces. The Earth Defense Authority maintained what were called observer assets throughout the compact's operational territory. Small vessels fast with minimal signatures, not warships, not officially. Their stated function was coordination and liaison support for human personnel attached to compact operations. Their actual function was, well, their actual function is what you're about to hear. Lieutenant Dara opened the channel, identified herself with a code sequence I didn't know, and transmitted a single standardized message. Threshold 7, Vasher IV, human personnel at risk, position follows. She transmitted our coordinates. Then she closed the channel, put her personal device away, and looked at Threnos. "Now we wait," she said. "How long?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "I don't even know if anyone received it." 24 minutes left on the Krethvashari window. We waited. I heard it before I saw it. That's the thing I always try to explain, and I'm not sure I've ever fully gotten across. Because the sound was not what you would expect. It was not an engine roar or a weapon's discharge or a dramatic sonic boom. It was a sound I associate with Earth, with places I grew up, a specific kind of mechanical percussion that has no equivalent in compact technology, because compact technology operates on different physical principles. Compact drives are smooth. They work with the local electromagnetic environment. They're efficient, optimized, almost silent in their normal operational range. Human military reentry systems are not optimized for quiet. They are optimized for speed, for survivability, and for arriving at a specific location in the minimum possible time, regardless of what the local electromagnetic environment thinks about that. The sound was. It was like something tearing through the sky with absolute intent. Not one thing, multiple things. 18 things, as it turned out. I looked up. The pale lavender sky was wrong. There were shapes in it that hadn't been there, coming down fast, too fast, combat insertion fast, and they were leaving trails behind them, not the smooth displacement curves of compact vessels. Rough, atmospheric friction trails, orange at the edges where the heat of reentry was still dissipating. The kind of trail that's made by something that has just punched through a planetary atmosphere at maximum combat velocity, and does not care what anything thinks about that. 18 insertion pods. Compact insertion pods don't look like this. Compact pods are sleek, aerodynamic, built to minimize atmospheric disruption. These were different, heavier, asymmetrical in a specific way that I recognized from training files. Earth Defense Authority Mark 7 insertion units, reinforced hull, variable thrust descent system, built to carry 4 soldiers each. 4 soldiers per pod. 18 pods. 72 soldiers. Dropping from an EDA vessel that had not been anywhere in this system 11 minutes ago. I thought, where did they come from? And then I thought, it doesn't matter where they came from. Because they were here. The pods decelerated in the last 200 meters, not gently. The EDA Mark 7 uses burst thrust deceleration, full retroburn in a very short window, and what that looks like from below is a sudden, bright, percussive event. 18 times, like 18 very deliberate statements. They landed on the ridgeline and in the open ground around Threshold 7, with the kind of controlled violence that is the specific signature of military hardware designed to deliver people to places in a hurry. Pods cracking open on impact, ramps deploying before the dust settled. And then the soldiers came out. I have served in uniform. I know what soldiers look like. I know the difference between security personnel and combat personnel, between people who carry weapons because it's part of the kit and people who carry them because they are the kind of person who will use them, and you know it looking at them. These were the second kind. They were in full Earth Defense Authority combat armor, which is, it's different from compact armor. Compact armor is optimized for the wearer's species-specific biology, which means it's diverse. It looks different on a Velthari than on a Hressi than on a Tunathi. EDA combat armor is designed around human physiology, which means it compensates for exactly the things humans don't do naturally well in combat: reaction time, environmental exposure, the particular vulnerabilities that come with being, as the Compact's assessment had so memorably put it, adequate for local system defense. EDA armor is not adequate. EDA armor is a lot of things. Adequate is not one of them. The lead pod landed about 40 meters from where I was standing. The ramp deployed. The soldier who came out first moved the way people move when they know exactly where they are and exactly what they're looking at, and have already decided what they're going to do about it. She was medium height, compact, moving with that specific economy of motion that combat experience produces. Her helmet was active, full display. I could see the sensor indicators from where I stood, and she was already scanning, already establishing sector awareness, already doing the thing that soldiers do when they arrive in a situation and have approximately 0 seconds to understand it. She looked at the HFY vessels overhead. Something happened in her posture, something very small, a very brief adjustment. And then she kept moving. Her name was Sergeant Major Anya Thorne. I learned that later. In the moment, she was just the soldier who stepped out of the first pod and didn't stop moving, and whose presence made the ridgeline feel different. Not safe, exactly, because nothing about the next 40 minutes was safe, but different. Changed. Like something had shifted in the physics of the situation. Lieutenant Dara met Sergeant Major Thorne at the center of the ridgeline. I was close enough to hear. Lieutenant, Thorne's voice through the helmet comm was clear and direct. Situation. Dara gave it in about 30 seconds. HFY vessels, primacy claim, evacuation in progress, atmospheric disruption blocking transport lift, 12 minutes remaining on the window. She was precise and fast, and Thorne was already moving as she spoke, routing the information to her unit, establishing positions. Loaded transports, Thorne asked. 2, Strait of Nilos and Hellion pathway on the main pad, can't lift. Thorne looked toward the main pad, looked up at the HFY vessel overhead, made a calculation that I couldn't follow but could see happening. Commander Thorne, Submarshal Threnos had approached. Your authority to act here. Is Earth Defense Authority Article 7, Thorne said, without breaking her scan pattern. Protection of human personnel in compact operational territory. We're not in conflict with compact authority, Submarshal. We're in support of it. Threnos was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? He asked. Thorne stopped scanning, looked at him directly. I'm going to talk to them, she said. What followed was, I want to get this right, because it's the part people always find hardest to believe, and I understand why, and I also need you to understand that I was standing approximately 30 meters away, and I watched the whole thing. Sergeant Major Thorne walked to the center of the main landing pad. Her unit was deployed in positions across the ridgeline, not offensive positions. Specific positions. I recognize some of it from doctrine, the rest I've analyzed since. They were positioned to be visible, deliberately visible. The EDA Mark 7 armor has high contrast marking panels on the shoulder and chest plates specifically for visual identification, and those panels were active. They wanted to be seen. 72 soldiers in full combat kit, standing in visible positions on a ridgeline, under 4-kilometer HFY vessels. Not weapons raised, not targeting systems active, just present, visible, undeniably physically, materially present. And Thorne, in the center of the pad, opened a broadcast channel on a frequency that the HFY vessels would receive. HFY flagship. This is Sergeant Major Anya Thorne, Earth Defense Authority, 73rd Rapid Response Group. I am speaking on behalf of the human personnel at this location. I am asking you to restore atmospheric conditions sufficient for our transports to lift off. I am asking this one time clearly, without ambiguity. Silence. Thorne waited. 8 seconds. 10. Sergeant Major. The Krethvashari resonance broadcast again, that inside-the-skull sensation. You represent a species that the compact designates as a pause, and I swear I could hear something in that pause, something that might have been a form of careful assessment, junior membership. You do not have authority to make demands in this context. Thorne's response came immediately. You're right, she said. I don't have authority to make demands. I'm not making a demand. I'm making a statement. Another silence, shorter this time. What statement? And here is the part that I always get to, where people lean forward. Thorne said, there are 72 of us standing on this rock. There are 2 ships full of people who need to leave. You are preventing them from leaving. I want you to understand one thing clearly, from one species to another, so there is no ambiguity between us. Pause. We are not leaving, none of us, not one, not until those transports can lift. That's the statement. That is the only statement I have. The Krethvashari were quiet for a long time. 11 seconds, 12, 15. Long enough that people around me started exchanging glances. Long enough that I started to think, this hasn't worked. It hasn't worked, and we are now in a different kind of situation. And then the Krethvashari flagship moved. Not toward us. Up. It rose, smoothly and precisely, back to its original holding position. The other 2 vessels adjusted to maintain formation. The atmospheric turbulence indicators on the sensor array began to drop. The Strait of Nilo's pilot came through on the local channel. We're reading clear approach. Lift is possible. We're ready. The Hellion Pathway pilot confirmed clear. We're lifting. Dara was beside me again. I don't remember her moving. She was just suddenly there. We watched the Hellion Pathway lift. Slow at first, the drive still reduced, but lifting. Climbing. The ascent was longer than normal, the trajectory shallower, but it was moving. It was going up. The Strait of Nilos lifted 30 seconds later, clean and fast. Both ships climbing. The sky above us was still dominated by 3 alien vessels the size of small mountains. The Krethvashari did not move again. They held their position. They maintained communication silence for the next 19 minutes while the remaining personnel on the surface, which included Thorne 72, plus the 15 of us from Threshold 7, conducted an orderly boarding of the EDA rapid response vessels that descended from above the Krethvashari vessels. That's the part I didn't explain and should. Thorne's unit had not dropped from orbit. They dropped from 2 EDA vessels that had positioned themselves above the Krethvashari fleet. Above, somehow, using approach vectors that I don't have clearance to know, and the pilots apparently don't discuss publicly. They'd gotten above the Krethvashari vessels and deployed the insertion pods downward through the displacement field zone. I asked Thorne about this during the debriefing. How they'd gotten above the Krethvashari fleet without being detected. She looked at me for a moment. We're very good at not being where people expect us to be, she said. That was the entire answer I got. The retrieval vessels descended after the Krethvashari vessels moved. 2 of them, smaller than the EDA insertion carriers, extremely fast military transport configuration. They came down to a pad about 300 meters from the main landing pad, and they did it with an efficiency that made the whole thing look planned, which maybe it was. Maybe Thorne's unit had contingency plans for contingency plans. Maybe that's what the EDA does. We boarded in order. Thorne's unit last, maintaining visible positions on the ridgeline until the final 3 boarding ramps deployed, and then they moved to the transports with the same controlled efficiency they'd used throughout. The last person to board was Thorne herself. She paused at the ramp. She looked up at the Krethvashari vessels for a moment. I don't know what that pause was. I can't tell you what she was thinking. She didn't say anything and her helmet was opaque so I couldn't see her expression. Then she walked up the ramp, and the ramp closed and we lifted. I watched Vasher IV recede through the porthole. The planet is beautiful from above. I'd known that from the pre-mission briefing materials, but knowing something and experiencing it are different, as I keep saying, and what I experienced was a very particular thing. The complicated sensation of looking at something beautiful that had just tried to kill you, and feeling both the beauty and the near killing simultaneously, with no clear way to put them in separate categories. The bioluminescent channels were visible even from orbit. The river systems lit from within, glowing faintly blue-green in the darkness of the planet's night side. The crystal formations below the surface, 9 weeks of careful cataloging, now in hard-sealed sample cases in the hold of the Hellion pathway, had done that. All of that light was connected to what Dr. Pellerin had been studying. What she'd had to walk away from. I thought about her, walking out of the survey shelter with one case and her notebook. I thought about Corporal Yusef, telling me his mother was going to be annoyed. I thought about Lieutenant Dara, sitting on the observation ledge in the evening, watching the light. Submarshal Threnos came to find me in the passenger compartment. He was still in full kit. Most of us were. Nobody had changed yet. We were still in that in-between state where you haven't quite believed you've survived yet, so your body is still treating the situation as ongoing. He sat down next to me, which was unusual. He usually remained in the command section. He said without preamble, "I want to tell you something." I waited. "In 41 years of service," he said, "I have never seen what I saw today." He was quiet for a moment. "I have read the assessments," he continued, "of humanity, the integration analyses, the capability reviews, the projections about where your species will be in 100 years, in 500. I have read the terminology that gets used." He paused again. "Adequate for local system defense." I looked at him. "I would like to formally report," he said, with the precise care of a Velthari who is being very deliberate about something, "that the assessment requires revision." He didn't smile. Veltharis don't exactly, not in a way that maps to human expressions, but something in his secondary skin layer did something very brief and warm, a color I hadn't seen before. Then he stood up and returned to the command section. I spoke to Sergeant Major Thorne once more, before we reached the compact relay station. She was in the EDA transport's briefing area, running through after-action reports with her unit commanders. She was efficient and thorough, and I got the strong impression that her brain was already 6 steps past what had just happened, already at the next problem. I asked if I could have 5 minutes. She gave me 5 minutes. "When you transmitted that statement to the Kreth Vashari," I said, "when you said you weren't leaving." "Yeah." "Were you?" I paused. "How confident were you that it would work?" She considered this. "Honestly, please. 50-50, she said, "maybe 60-40. The calculus was that the cost of removing us forcibly was higher than the cost of letting the transports lift. The primacy claim goes through compact legal. They'd already won that argument. Physically, removing us would have been a political cost they weren't certain about. I thought there was a reasonable chance they'd decide it wasn't worth it." "Reasonable chance," I said. 60-40, she said again, steady, matter of fact. 60-40. She had walked out onto the landing pad and stood under a 4-kilometer alien vessel and told them she wasn't moving on 60-40 odds. I thought about saying this to her. She was already looking back at her after-action report. I said, "Thank you, Sergeant Major." She looked up briefly. Something flickered across her expression. Not embarrassment exactly, but something in the neighborhood. "Wasn't just me," she said. 312 people got off that rock. That's what happened today." She went back to her report. I left her to it. The formal outcome took several months to work through compact legal processes. The Kreth-Vashari primacy claim on Vasher IV was ultimately upheld. The compact's legal review found that their prior survey data met the charter threshold. Vasher IV passed to Kreth-Vashari administrative jurisdiction 6 months after the evacuation. The survey data that our teams had collected, 9 weeks of observations, the samples Dr. Pellerin had carried out in that single case, the geological baseline readings, all of it, was retained by the compact as legitimately gathered prior to claim enforcement. There was considerable legal argument about this. The compact ultimately held that data gathered before formal claim notification could not be retroactively seized. Dr. Pellerin continued her research. Last I heard, she'd published 2 papers from the Vasher IV samples that, according to people who understand these things, changed several significant assumptions about bioluminescent mineral systems. She wrote the first paper in about 3 weeks. I'm not surprised. The Earth Defense Authority's involvement was officially described in compact records as protective liaison response under Article 7 provisions. The compact's High Assembly had some things to say about EDA operational protocols and the manner of their arrival. There was particular concern expressed about the positioning of EDA vessels above the Kreth-Vashari fleet, which was described in Assembly debate as an unprecedented escalation of positional demonstration. The EDA's response to this concern was, essentially, that they had acted within their charter authority, and they were sorry if the compact found the situation uncomfortable. Nobody formally disciplined anyone. The assessment of human military capability in compact records was, according to a document I was shown during my final debrief, and which I cannot quote directly, updated to reflect revised operational parameters. I'll take it. Corporal Youssef called his mother the moment we had relay access again. He stood in the corridor of the transport with his personal comm device pressed to his ear and his eyes squeezed shut, and he said, "I'm okay, Mama. I'm okay, I know, I'm okay." He said it about 7 times. And then he said something in Darija that I didn't understand, and she said something back, and then he laughed, really laughed, the pure kind, and he stood in the corridor with his eyes still shut and his face doing something complicated and good. I kept walking. Gave him the space. Some things don't need an audience. Lieutenant Dara sat with me in the transport's narrow observation bay as we made final approach to the relay station. We'd been quiet for a while, comfortable quiet, the kind that happens between people who have been through the same thing and don't need to explain it to each other. "I didn't know they'd come," she said eventually. I looked at her. "When I sent the transmission," she said, "I didn't know if anyone was listening or if they were close enough or if the calculation would come out right." She paused. I thought if there's any chance I have to try it, because what else do you do?" "What else do you do?" I repeated. She looked out at the stars. "Humans are strange," she said. "We are," I agreed. "Not bad strange." She said it carefully, like she was still figuring out the exact shape of what she meant. "Just the way you run toward things, the way you don't seem to do the math the same way everyone else does. You look at a situation where the numbers say stop and some of you just keep going." I thought about Thorne on the landing pad. 60-40. "We know the math," I said. "We just don't always let it make the decision." Dara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to put that in my report." I think about Vasher IV often. Not in a traumatized way. I want to say that clearly for anyone who might be concerned. I've processed it. The debrief was thorough. The therapy was, honestly, useful. Dr. Os is a very good therapist, and the nod is deeply reassuring. I think about it because of what it taught me about scale. Not the scale of the Kreth-Vashari vessels, though that was genuinely impressive. The other scale. The scale of a decision made under pressure by a person with incomplete information and 60-40 odds who walks out onto a landing pad anyway. The scale of a corporal who asks an honest question and gets an honest answer and says okay and goes back to work. The scale of a scientist who carries 9 weeks of her life's work out of a shelter in one sealed case and doesn't look back. Scale isn't always the size of a ship. Sometimes it's the size of a choice. We landed at the relay station on a Tuesday. Compact Standard Time, anyway. I've lost track of what day it was in any other calendar. The station was busy. Stations always are. And nobody looked at us twice when we disembarked. We were just more people coming in from somewhere, carrying gear, doing the familiar post-assignment shuffle of people who have been somewhere for a while and are now somewhere else. Normal. Ordinary. As if we had not, 48 hours ago, been 312 people in the shadow of something enormous, waiting for the worst, watching the sky for something that might or might not come. And then the sky opened up, and it did. My sister asked me when I finally called her from the station, and she cried again and made me repeat the story again, and I didn't mind. She asked me what it felt like when the pods came through. I thought about it for a while. You know how it feels, I said eventually, when you're in a situation that seems completely decided, when the math is done and it's pointing one direction and there's nothing left to do but wait for it to resolve. Yeah, she said. It felt like the math was wrong, I said, not like the situation changed, like the math was wrong all along and we just found out. She was quiet for a second. That's a weird thing to feel, she said. Yeah, I said, I know. But I think that's exactly what it was. The math said we were finished. And then 72 people fell out of the sky and reminded 312 of us, and 3 Krethvashari warships, and maybe, if Threnos's report made it to the right people on the High Assembly, reminded the entire galactic compact that humanity doesn't much care what the math says when there are people standing on a rock who need to come home. We braced for our final hour. And then the humans dropped from the sky. That's the whole story. Same story 40 times. Same moment where everyone leans forward. I don't mind telling it. Some stories are worth telling again.